Hello YouTube, how's everyone doing? It's Professional here. So a few months ago, I played the game The Dark Picture's Little Hope, which I really enjoyed, and this game was actually based on real events, the Salem Witch Trials, with their own twist on it, and I thought that I would make a video talking about the real history of the trials, what happened there, and how realistic it is to the game, because the game got some things right about the real trials and a few things wrong. You guys might have heard me talking about this video several times on streams, but this is a video that I've been making for almost half a year. It took me some time to put it together. I had a lot of script on this video, but this is probably my favorite lore video that I've ever made. So I hope you guys enjoy this. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please check out my Man of Medan video, which I will have linked after this, which is a video I did over a year ago, talking about the real history of the Orang Medan ship. So now, let's get started. The Salem Witch Trials, which were an event that happened in colonial America in 1692. The event happened in the town of Salem, Massachusetts, and this is over 80 years before the American Revolution. And one big misconception, one thing that a lot of people get wrong about the Salem Witch Trials is that they think it only happened in Salem, when there was many other towns and cities that did trials as well. Salem was the location that became the most infamous, so that's where people know it from, the Salem Witch Trials. Witch trials were going on for centuries before this, and it happened in Europe as well. Even though the characters in the game are fictional, I do strongly believe they're inspired by real people, and I'll demonstrate that. But firstly, before we get into what happened during the Salem Witch Trials, I want to talk about the Puritans, their backstory and their culture. The Puritans are the people that lived back then, and these were the same people who ran the witch trials. So in order to understand the witch trials, we need to understand the Puritans, and we need to understand their history and their culture. So who are the Puritans? The Puritans were English settlers that came to the New World to escape religious persecution in England. They were extremely religious, and they believed that anything that wasn't in the Bible had no place in their religion. For example, they supported banning celebrating Christmas because of this. That's right, they didn't even celebrate Christmas. The Puritans, they hated other religious groups. They didn't like Catholics, they didn't like Jews. Anyone who was not a Puritan, they basically did not like. But one group they really didn't like were the Quakers. Quakers were a religious minority in Britain and the New World. They were a form of Christianity that believed that all human beings were equal, and they believed that they had God inside of them. They were extremely against violence and war, and oftentimes they refused to pay military taxes or serve in the military, which made the British government hate them as well. The Quakers, they were seen as a threat to the Puritans. If someone was caught being a Quaker, they would either be thrown in jail or whipped for the first offense. The second offense, women would actually have a hole cut in their tongue, and men would have their ears cut off. On the third offense, they would hang them. The reason that I'm talking about this is because this is to show what these people believed. This is how psychotic the people were who conducted the Salem Witch Trials. And these incidents were not even witch-related, but them simply going after other religious groups because they had a different belief. One of the most famous victims of the Puritans was a woman by the name of Mary Dyer. She was an English Puritan who became a Quaker and fought for equal rights. When she was very outspoken in Boston, she was banished, but she returned, to which she was threatened, and then she was exiled once again. She would not stop protesting until all the Puritans stopped their attacks on Quakers. In 1660, she returned once again, and this time she was hanged. You had mobs of people who were cheering as this poor woman was hanged. She was between 48 and 49 at the time of her death, and because her death was so brutal, King Charles II banned the colony of Massachusetts in 1661 from executing anyone for being a Quaker. The Massachusetts Charter was revoked in 1684, which was a list of Puritan laws, and a royal governor was actually set up in 1686 to make sure that the Puritans listened to the new English law. In 1689, the Toleration Act was passed, which granted more religious freedoms to different groups, but it was flawed. What the Toleration Act said was that different Protestant groups have religious freedom, as long as they pledge loyalty to the state. This act, however, did not protect Catholics and Jews, which were still heavily discriminated. However, despite all of these new laws, nothing stopped them from conducting the witch trials, which is where we now go into Little Hope. So when the game first starts, we see the bus driver taking his route before he's told by a police officer to drive through Little Hope instead. Once he takes the detour, he crashes after he sees a little girl in the road who looks a lot like Megan. As the characters then explore the town looking for the bus driver, they come across several places where spirits will actually grab their hand and they are then transported to the witch trials. They first meet Mary, who asks the characters what their names are. She then asks them to play with her before another hooded character comes over and tells her that she knows of her affection with the devil before taking her away. Throughout the story, Mary, she's responsible for accusing the vast majority of characters of witchcraft. She accuses Amy, Joseph, Tabitha, and David, and all of them are executed. Mary is most likely based on Abigail Williams, who was the first accuser in the Salem Witch Trials. She was either 11 or 12 years old, the exact same age as Mary. Her accusations led to the deaths of 20 people during the trials. So what is her backstory? Abigail Williams was the adopted daughter to the Reverend of Salem, Reverend Parris. In the game, we can see that Reverend Carver is obsessed with gaining custody over her. And what is Reverend Carver's first name? In Little Hope, it's Reverend Simon Carver. But in the real story, it's Reverend Samuel Parris. I don't think this is a coincidence. The fact that both of the Reverend's names start with an S, and both of them, involved like children that were 11 or 12 years old. So I think that this is exactly what this is based on. And what's really creepy about this story is that it's completely unknown to what happened to Abigail's real parents. Some sources say that her parents were killed by Native Americans, but this hasn't ever been proven. It's also unknown exactly how she came in contact with Reverend Parris. Parris is commonly referred to as her uncle, but there's no evidence that she was blood related to him in any way possible. So where she came from exactly and how Reverend Parris got custody of her, that's unknown. The incident in Salem started when Abigail and her stepsister Betty Parris, who was Parris's biological daughter, started having temper tantrums, weird behavior, running around the house, hiding under beds, trying to run up the chimney, and screaming. This is very similar behavior to what Megan in Little Hope is experiencing in 1971. She has temper tantrums, odd behavior, she doesn't watch where she is going, accidentally stepping on Dennis's records, and she talks to her doll as if it's some being she can only see. Her grades are also suffering in school. Megan is also adopted, which I do not think is a coincidence either, as are her siblings. She's adopted just like Abigail was by the Reverend. Reverend Carson in 1971 is worried about Megan and holds her after Mass to talk with her. Megan's adopted parents, they fight over her, and many of her siblings aren't nice to her. Her adopted father, James, is a factory worker who's also a drunk. And her mother, Anne, while she seems concerned about Megan's behavior, she doesn't investigate further. She just ignores her and tells her, I want to take a bath. Anthony is the only one who seems to care about Megan. Even Tanya, who is playable. All of her choices aren't compassionate as Anthony's are. Anthony starts making some tea and then walks outside hearing Tanya. Tanya claims that Megan locked her out. Then someone puts Megan's doll in the stove and it catches fire. The house is then engulfed in flames, and James, Anthony's father, is crusted to death by rubble when he wakes up. Tanya then either tries to climb down the drain pipe, in which she trips and gets hanged on her scarf, or she enters the house and burns to death. And Anthony's mother suffocates in the bathroom, and Dennis falls off the roof, being impaled by the fence. Anthony, he runs back inside trying to save his mom, who he didn't see die, and he is the only survivor with his ear being badly burned. The fire becomes essential to the story later on in the game. In the real story, after Abigail and Betty's strange behavior, Reverend Parris calls in a doctor. It's important to note that the doctors in this time period, especially in a Puritan village, they weren't the most reliable. The reason is because in a town like Salem, this is a Puritan village, as was Little Hope. The doctor had diagnosed the girls as being possessed by the devil. Now today, we would laugh at a diagnosis like this and think, what kind of doctor would come to this conclusion? But this is way before modern medicine and any kind of advanced medical technology. People oftentimes relied on the supernatural and religion to explain things that they could not. I'm not criticizing religion, I'm simply saying that in this time period, when you had something strange going on, the first answer in many people's mind would be some kind of supernatural force, not something else. This news, it spread through the town like crazy, and many believed it as they believed the devil was trying to possess the Reverend's children. The Reverend was convinced his daughters were possessed, but I think there was a more sinister motive for his actions, which I will explain later. Soon other girls in the town who came into contact with Abigail began admitting that they were possessed as well. Some of these girls were kids, others were young adults like Mercy Lewis, who was 17. But now here's the question many people have. But professional, if there were no witches, why were so many girls admitting to it? The answer is there. You just simply have to look at Puritan culture. Remember what I said about the Puritans earlier, how religious they were, even crazy with many of their beliefs. They went too far in many of their actions. These girls most likely started having a nocebo effect, which is the opposite of a placebo, where you are given a fake treatment and believe you'll be healthy. This is the opposite. These girls, because they had contact with both Betty and Abigail, believed they had become possessed because of their association with them. Think about it this way. You are one of these girls. You are friends with a girl like Abigail. She starts acting strange and admits to being a witch. You then think to yourself, could she have possessed me as well? You start thinking you are feeling strange when in reality you're not. And then you assume you're possessed and admit it to the court. That's what happened here. Abigail and Betty named the 3 witches who they believed were possessing them. And these 3 supposed witches were Tabitha, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. All 3 of these were older women who were not liked well in Salem. Tabitha was a slave, and she was owned by Reverend Parris, and her husband, another slave, John Indian, was also owned by Parris. It's unknown exactly where Tabitha was from, but most people agree she was either from the Caribbean or South America. People did not like her simply for the fact that she was a different race, as the Puritans were all white. They didn't like her because she was a slave. There was a big racist tone to this. They had a mistrust of her because she was a foreigner. She never wanted to come to Salem. She was taken against her will, as were her husband, and she was owned by the town's reverend. This shows you what kind of person Reverend Parris was. A reverend, a man of God, owning slaves. Sarah Good, on the other hand, was extremely poor and would sit on the streets of Salem begging and asking for money. Many people were unsympathetic to her and hated her for this reason. Sarah Osborne, on the other hand, was rich, and when her husband passed away, she married his servant, which she most likely cheated on him with. She also took her children's inheritance. All 3 of these women were disliked. Tabitha for being a foreigner, Sarah Good for being a beggar, and Sarah Osborne for her questionable actions. Do you see a pattern here? And during the trials, they are claiming a 9-year-old and 12-year-old girl picked these people out specifically. I doubt they had much contact with these people besides Tabitha, who they knew. Here's what I think happened. I think these people were not well liked in their communities, and I think the Reverend had pressured the girls into naming culprits. He probably yelled at them and said it was Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tabitha, wasn't it? The girls felt pressured and named these suspects. We also have to keep in mind that this is not only their guardian and father, but the town reverend. Kids are taught to respect authority, but back then this was even more strict. Like I said, this wasn't just their father, but a reverend. A reverend would have massive political and social power in this time period. They wouldn't think twice about disobeying him. And on top of that, you had a town doctor who also told them they were possessed. When so many people tell you one thing, especially when they are so-called experts, you begin to believe them. I believe the girls believed they were possessed, or they were so scared of the consequences that they felt pressured to name people, and these people were the same ones that the Reverend wanted named. So what ended up happening to both Sarah and Tabitha? Once they were accused, they were quickly arrested. They were taken to Boston for trial, and they soon turned against each other. Sarah Good denied all the allegations against her and instead blamed Sarah Osborne, saying that she was the witch. Osborne was not able to fight her allegations as she died that same year in prison from sickness. Tabitha was the only one who confessed, and she named Sarah Good and Osborne as other witches. She claimed that she had pinched the girls and was in communication with the devil. Both Abigail and Betty were accused of attempting fortune-telling, where they would drop an egg white into the water and then look at whatever symbol it dissolved into. Whether the girls actually did this, it was never proven, but there was no evidence that Tabitha actually taught them to do that. So what happened next exactly? A massive investigation into witches began in the town. Other girls soon started making accusations. These girls also included Elizabeth Booth, Elizabeth Hubbard, the niece of the doctor who diagnosed both Betty Parris and Abigail Williams of being possessed, Mercy Lewis, Mary Warren, and Putnam Jr. There was also others such as Thomas Putnam, the father of Ann Putnam Jr., and Sarah Bibber, an accused witch who later started accusing others. It's important to know that the afflicted, while they could be witches, they were most often girls who claimed to be possessed or tortured by witches. In total, around 200 people were accused, with 25 being killed during the trials. 19 were hanged, 1 was pressed to death with rocks, and the other 5 died in prison. The prisons in this time period were really horrible conditions, and if you want to know how psychotic the Puritans were, they threw a 4-year-old girl in prison during the trial of her mother, Sarah Good. Betty and Abigail both claimed that Dorothy had bit them, but there was no evidence of this. When Dorothy was interrogated, she claimed that she had a pet snake that talked to her and she fed it blood. This was Sarah Good's daughter. This was most likely an exaggerated false confession. First of all, no snake was ever found. And secondly, this is a 4-year-old girl. She doesn't understand the difference between right and wrong. I believe the investigators pressured her. How could a 4-year-old come up with such a ridiculous and detailed statement? In Christianity, Satan is oftentimes seen as a serpent figure, so I believe this is where the snake story was put in. Her mother was hanged in July of 1692, while she was in prison. Even if a 4-year-old commits a crime today, we don't throw them in prison. This 4-year-old spent over half a year in prison from March 1692 until December 1692 when she was released on bond. She was never tried after that. But let's talk about Reverend Simon Carver, who is the main antagonist in Little Hope. He is obviously inspired by Reverend Samuel Parris, the Reverend who led the investigations and started the witch trials. In the video game, we know Reverend Carver was manipulating Mary into accusing others of witchcraft, but why was he doing this exactly? He seems to have some kind of sick pleasure from executing the accused. Additionally, he wants full custody of Mary, and he has her accuse both her brother David and sister Tabitha. Additionally, it's not fully confirmed but heavily implied that he was actually molesting her. This is most likely implied by the scene in which he says our secret.
Come here, girl. I would speak with you. You cannot talk of our secret. Eternal damnation awaits if you do. We have an understanding, do we not?
No evil word shall leave my lips.
Should you breathe a word, or the edge of a word about the other things, then I will come to you in the black of some terrible night, and bring a reckoning that will shudder you.
Come now, Reverend, let us begin. Enough time has gone begging.
Additionally, Carver may have been seizing land from the victims. In this time period, women did not have many rights, but one major right they had in Salem was the right to own land, and many of the victims were women in the trials. We can find a document inside the museum which actually details this. What would happen is, after a convicted person had been hanged, the government would seize their property and then auction it off. So it's entirely possible for someone like Reverend Carver or Parris to try someone, have them hanged, and then buy their land at auction for very cheap. Accusers could do this as well. A town's pastor would be a very important figure, both politically and socially back then. You could argue that he was the leader of the town. But in regards to the trial system, how did that work? How was this land taken exactly? So what happens if you were accused of being a witch at these trials? It's important to note that women were not the only ones who could be accused. Men could be accused of being wizards. You could also be accused of being in league with the devil. An investigation would usually start based on evidence that today would be considered nonsense. For instance, you could be accused by one of the afflicted, these are the girls who are claiming to be possessed, of casting a spell on them. You could also be accused of ridiculous things like wearing all black, not attending church regularly. You would be brought up to the magistrates by the sheriff, who in Little Hope is Isaac. Isaac is most likely based on the sheriff George Corwin, who presided over the executions and arrests during the Salem Witch Trials. He signed off on several executions and chose the execution site of the hanging, which 19 people were hanged. We see Isaac at every single execution as well as initiating it. So when you were brought before the magistrate, they asked how you would plead, similar to today, not guilty or guilty. You either pled one of the two. If you pled not guilty, you go to trial with a grand jury, and oftentimes this will end in less than a week. You could be found guilty and executed in that same week. If you went to trial, you had almost no chance. The vast majority who survived were people's cases that were thrown out before they went to trial or they escaped. Over 200 people were accused. That's how out of control the trials got. When you went to the trial, the court would not care about justice or a fair trial. They would do everything in their power to convict you, even if they had nothing on you. Most of the evidence against people was spectral. It would be witness testimony mostly. Oh, I saw him wearing all black, or he didn't attend church in a few weeks. They would also bring in the afflicted, who accused them of casting spells. They would even have other idiotic tests, such as the dream tests. Basically, people would testify that they had a nightmare and that they saw you doing bad things in that dream. This would not stand in court today, but back then this was acceptable. They would also do the water test, which is actually seen in a black frame photo in Little Hope. The black frame photos, they inform you of a possible future death, while the white frame photos show you possible future events. Daniel can find the like a stone picture. This is actually a real picture drawn from the Salem Witch Trials. When Daniel picks it up, it shows Angela being dragged into a river with chains by the monster representing her. In real life, the water test, what they did was they tied an accused person to a log or put them into a cage. They then would dunk them in water repeatedly. The idea of the test was that if you sink, you're innocent, because water was considered holy like the baptism. If you instead floated, you were considered to be guilty because the water rejected you and because it saw you as evil. As you can imagine, most people would drown, but even this was not enough to prove them innocent. Some people drowned during these tests. However, I was not able to find any record of anyone drowning from this test at Salem, but others drowned from this test in other locations because witch trials had been going on for nearly 100 years in the colonies at this time. Another test was the touch test. This is actually shown in the game. In the game, Amy is accused of being a witch and taken to trial. Mary is her primary accuser and starts shaking uncontrollably. Reverend Carver then tells the court that if Amy is the witch who cast a spell on Mary, that her touch will release her. This was a real test. They actually did this. Girls would shake or show some strange behavior, and the accused was told to touch them. If they touched them and the girls started acting normally, they would be seen as guilty. And as you can imagine, the girls oftentimes would stop acting strange when the accuser touched them. It was all an act, and it was shown very well in Little Hope of Mary faking it. In 1662, in England, 30 years before the trials, two women, Rose Cullender and Amy Denny, were accused of closing two girls' fists, that they couldn't open their fists. They claimed their fists were bound shut by them. The judge had them blindfolded, and numerous people touched them. The girls opened their fists on the wrong person, proving that they were faking it and lying. But despite this, both women were still hanged. So even if you had evidence in your favor, you were doomed. These trials, you had no chance if you pled not guilty. But what about pleading guilty? Everyone who actually pled guilty survived the trials. If you pled guilty, what would basically happen is you would admit to being in league with the devil, and the court would force you to attend some kind of religious sermons to save your soul. I believe the reason courts would spare them while kill those who pled not guilty is because they admitted to it and showed a desire to be, as quote, saved. The courts would also have you declare any other people conspiring with the devil. However, pleading not guilty, even though it would save your life, it would ruin your life. Your reputation would be ruined, you would be banned from any notable position, and your property and land would be confiscated by the state, making you homeless, just like I talked about earlier. So even if you pled guilty and you survived, the state would still take your land and they would auction it off to other people for very cheap prices. So why didn't more people plead guilty? Surely surviving is better, right? To understand this, we need to understand Puritan culture. The Puritans, like I said, they were a very religious people. They believed that even the smallest lie could send you to hell. So in essence, they believed that lying under any circumstances was wrong, even if it was to save your life. This shows how much culture has changed. Today, the vast majority of people will lie to save their lives. Additionally, some people valued their honor extremely and would do everything to fight for it and refuse to have their property taken. So it was based on honor for some people. They had to stand up for themselves. They would not lie, even if it meant their deaths. But now let's talk about some of the characters in the game and their real-life counterparts. So first, let's start with Isaac, since we talked about him a little bit earlier. The High Sheriff during the Salem Witch Trials was George Orwin. Isaac appears to be based on him because he signs the arrests and executions of everyone in Salem. Even though Samuel Parris, the priest, was the one leading the witch hunt, Orwin was the one enforcing it. Very similar in Little Hope, in which he follows the priest's orders, Reverend Carver's orders, without question. Isaac also appears to be around the same age as Corwin, in his 30s. He presided over Giles Corey's execution by stone pressing, which is very similar to Little Hope, in which Joseph is pressed to death. But what about Joseph and Amy? This couple plays a crucial role in the story, and in Anthony's imagination, they represent his mother and father. This couple are based on real people. In real life, they were Martha and Giles Corey. There's a few differences between real life and the game. For instance, in the game, they were both in their 40s, while in real life, Giles was 81 and Martha was 71. Martha was arrested before Giles, just like in the game. She was accused by Ann Putnam Jr. and Mercy Lewis of being a witch. Now, why was she targeted? In the game, she is targeted because she tries to scold Mary on what she was doing, but it's later revealed that this was orchestrated by Reverend Carver. In real life, she was accused for two reasons, in my opinion. The first reason is because she had a mixed-race son named Ben Oni. It's unknown who her lover was, but she gave birth to Ben Oni in 1677 and raised him, and he lived with her all these years, which shows that she loved him. In this time period, slavery was legal, and racism was very common. I have no doubt in my mind she was targeted for this very reason. She was also targeted because she questioned the trials. Martha was very outspoken against the trials and considered it madness, and she even criticized the judges, which is very risky. When she was arrested, it sent shockwaves throughout Salem. Why? Because she was very religious. She would regularly attend church. Usually they would go after people for not going to church, but she goes to church. On March 19, 1692, a warrant was issued for her arrest, and they went to her house, similar to Little Hope, but there was a bit of a difference. In the game, she panics and tells her husband she thinks she's getting accused. Then Carver comes with Isaac and arrests her. In real life, however, she was expecting them, not nervous, confident, and she said that she knows people were talking about her. The idiots arresting her, they thought that this was a supernatural statement, when it clearly wasn't. It's obvious that she knew people would be talking about her, because she criticized the trials and called them stupid. She claimed several times that witches did not exist. In the game, her husband defends her, but in real life, he at first thought that she might have been possessed, because she was constantly criticizing the government. I don't think that Giles, her husband, was a bad man. I just think he didn't think the authorities could be wrong. You have to understand, in this time period, people did not really criticize the government or call it stupid. That didn't happen back then. Today, people constantly call the government stupid. It shows how much culture has changed. Giles never accused anyone. He wasn't like Parris, who was manipulating the trials, or Corwin signing death warrants. He just simply thought his wife may be guilty. But after seeing what happened to his wife, he changed his mind. He started questioning the government and was asking around town about his wife and trying to get to the bottom of the accusations. This is very similar to what we see in Little Hope, in where he tries to get to the bottom of what happened and defends his wife at trial. 1 month later, on April 18th, he was accused of witchcraft and arrested. Why? Because he was defending his wife against the accusations, so they went after him next. At Marfa's trial, she was openly defiant against the courts and claimed that the girls were being hysterical and irrational. She claimed that there was no witches and it was all imagination. She never questioned religion or God, but they made it seem like she was. That's what the courts were accusing her of. She instead questioned whether witches were real. Ann Putnam Jr. and Mercy Lewis claimed that they saw a yellow bird landing on her hands, suckling on her. They then started screaming and shaking, claiming that Marfa was strangling them, to which Marfa called them liars. I think that Ann Putnam Jr. was most likely manipulated by the courts to make these statements against Marfa because she was only 12. But I think that Mercy Lewis, who was 17, knew what she was doing, and she knew what she was doing was wrong and still kept lying. And I have proof that she knew what she was doing was wrong. And I'll discuss this a little bit later. On September 22nd, Marfa was found guilty, to which she was shocked. She couldn't believe it. The problem is, even though Marfa questioned the existence of witches, she believed in the justice system too much. She believed that her peers, the jury, would not find her guilty, but they did. It's like I said, no one on the jury will find anyone not guilty because these courts were set up to convict, not to have a fair trial. The jury was most likely scared they would be next. They could be accused of being witches also. Marfa should have pled guilty. I know it's stupid to plead to something you didn't do, but she could have possibly survived. 12 days later, on September 22nd, she was hanged from a tree. In the game, she is thrown into the water with chains while Joseph watches in horror. This form of execution did not happen in Salem. People did drown accused witches, but it didn't happen in Salem. The reason we see her drown in Little Hope is because Anthony imagined her as his mother, and she was in the bathtub before she suffocated. Anthony sees her imaginary death as this. As for Giles Corey, he was executed 3 days earlier, on September 19th. In the game, Amy dies first and Joseph dies later, but in real life, it was reversed. Joseph's death is the most accurate in the game. This really happened. Giles Corey was pressed to death with several large stones. But why such a brutal way? Giles Corey refused to make a plea in court. He would refuse to answer the judge on whether he pled guilty or not guilty. So why didn't he make a plea? It's because he knew he would lose either way. If he pled not guilty, he would go to trial and he would be found guilty and executed. His property would then be seized by the government and auctioned off. If he pled guilty, he would survive, but would still lose his property and be disgraced. You have to look at it from Giles' perspective. He was 80 years old. Very few people lived to this age in this time. He knew he was going to die of old age. He had a long life and figured that if he did not make a plea, then the state could not take his property. People who refused to make a plea could not be tried. Therefore, their property could not be seized. The courts had not dealt with someone doing this before. So what they did to try to prevent more people from doing it is they would press people with heavy stones who refused to make a plea. What they basically would do is take a bunch of wooden planks, put them on top of you, and then slowly put more heavy stones on you, essentially crushing you to death. This is exactly what happened to Giles Corey. In real life, Giles was pressed for 2 days, and Corwin the sheriff kept asking him if he would make a plea, and he said more weight each time. Some of the idiots in the crowd believed that it was proof Giles was a wizard when he was asking for more weight. The reality is, the reason he was asking for more weight was because he most likely wanted to die faster. He knew that he wasn't going to survive this and wanted to die faster. This is a really horrible way to die. In real life, George Corwin, who has said inspired Isaac, was actually getting really frustrated at Giles. He would actually ask him several times, "Are you going to make a plea?" when he was crushing him, and Giles refused to make a plea. So he got so angry that he actually climbed up on top of the planks and was stomping on him. In Little Hope, we can see the characters trying to save Joseph, and Carver starts claiming that this is proof of Joseph's guilt when the rocks start moving. He has Isaac put on more stones and crushes Joseph to death. He crushed Giles the same way, but in addition to stomping him, he would also take a wooden stick and hit Giles' tongue as hard as possible. But what happened to Giles' property? He saved it because he never entered a plea, so the state could not take his land, which he left for his kids. However, this didn't stop Corwin, who actually took Giles' kids to court over his land. The real death of Giles was much more brutal, and he survived for 2 days before being crushed to death. I don't think the game shows the stomping or the tongue stabbing, as it would have made it much more brutal. But what happened to Corwin the sheriff? How did it end for Isaac, who's also in the game? What happened to this evil man? Corwin signed up on the executions of the 19 people who were hanged, and attended each one. Corwin faced no punishments for his role in the trials. 4 years after the trials in 1696, he died of a heart attack. He was only 30 years old, but the story doesn't end there for him. Philip English had returned from Boston when the trials had ended. Philip was a wealthy landowner in the Salem area, and when he was accused, he fled to Boston, where many accused would hide out. He realized that Corwin had seized all of his land and possessions. He refused to allow Corwin a burial until he was compensated. Now, how he did this is unknown. Basically, there's 2 versions that I read. The first version states that he had a lot of influence with the town government, and therefore prevented them from burying Corwin until he was compensated. This is most likely what happened. The other states that he actually had Corwin's body in his basement and would not allow his burial. Eventually, he was compensated and Corwin was buried. People in the town considered it barbaric that Philip prevented Corwin's burial. But what do you guys think? Because we have to understand English's perspective. He had all of his land seized and was forced to flee for his life because of this idiot Corwin. 19 innocent people were hanged because of Corwin, and he crushed Giles to death, stomping on him and stabbing his tongue. Was it right that his burial was initially delayed? I don't know. I'm not saying it was right, but at the same time I understand English's perspective. A lot of people lost their lives because of this idiot. Corwin was definitely a terrible person, as is Isaac. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of that. But this is the last piece of evidence that shows that Isaac is based on Corwin. Look at Isaac's grave in the cemetery. He died just 10 years after the trial. They were both in their 30s and died young. The sheriff in modern day is proof of this. He has the same face as Isaac. This is where Anthony imagined him from. He represents authority. Corwin was a sheriff. In real life, Anthony imagines Isaac in the same role based on the sheriff in modern day. The difference is the sheriff isn't a bad man in modern day, but this is where Anthony's mind imagined him from. But now let's talk about some of the events that inspired the game. In the game, we can come across this plaque which says the Commencement Day Massacre. The plaque says on Commencement Day 1690, while the Puritans celebrated the graduation of the town's young men, an army of French and Indians attacked, burning a number of homesteads. 8 people were killed and a number of women and children taken into slavery in Acadia. The fate of the slaves is unknown. This is most likely based on a real massacre, the Candlemas Massacre. Both massacres were very similar to each other. In the game and in real life, they both start with C. They both were on significant days. The massacre in real life was in York, Maine, and it was on Candlemas, a religious day, where in Little Hope, it was on Commencement Day to celebrate the graduation of young men. Both of the massacres involved the French and Native Americans attacking the town, in Little Hope and in real life, the town of York, Maine. In the game, 8 were murdered and 14 were taken away as slaves. In real life, the massacre was much worse. Around 50 people were murdered by a force of 200 to 300 Abenaki Native Americans and French Canadians. 100 people were also captured and forced to march into the Canadian border. This happened on January 24, 1692, where in the game it happened in 1690, but in Little Hope. The prisoners were marched to the Canadian border, and Maine is one of the coldest states in America. They were both also marched to Acadia. Many of the prisoners most likely did not survive the march. This massacre was horrific. The Abenaki warriors and the French Canadians, they went door to door, murdering people and killing them with tomahawks. They looted the town of York and set fire to the majority of the buildings. The town's minister, Reverend, he tried to get on his horse and run away, but he was shot and murdered. France and Britain were at war with each other at this time in King William's War. The French and the English, they hated each other. They competed for power in North America and had fought in several wars, eventually ending with the French and Indian War, where Britain acquired Canada. Another reason that the French and English hated each other was a religious conflict. The French were mainly Roman Catholic, where the English were mostly Anglican Protestant. The Candlemas Massacre was actually led by a French priest by the name of Father Thury. This massacre was very important to the Salem Witch Trials, as when people heard of it in Salem, they were horrified, and when they found out a Catholic priest led this massacre, they declared it an act of Satan, because again, remember, the Puritans really did not like Catholics, and when they hear that a Catholic priest had led this massacre, they are convinced that the Catholics are in league with Satan and that the French are also involved in that. Many refugees from New York, they actually settled in Salem. Captain John Alden traveled to Quebec, where he paid the ransom of the prisoners that were still alive. Back then, prisoners were treated very differently in times of war. Back then, civilians were also captured and sent to forced labor until a ransom was paid. A ransom is basically the same as with kidnappers today. The capturing party demands a huge sum paid to the release for the prisoners. This is why military officers in this time period were captured numerous times and released in the same war. Generally, women and children were exempt from this and were not captured. However, there were times when this happened, and here's an example of it. Children and women were captured, and kids were even killed during the Candlemas Massacre. But what happened to the prisoners? Many of the other prisoners, it's unknown what happened to them, as John Alden was never able to fully negotiate their release because he was accused during the Salem Witch Trials and taken to Salem. He was held in jail in Boston until his trial, but who was accusing Captain John Alden? One of the people accusing him was a girl by the name of Mercy Lewis, one of the afflicted. Remember I mentioned her earlier? Mercy Lewis was a 17-year-old girl. She was one of the more older girls, which means that she knew what she was doing. She's 17, she's a young adult. If we look into her background, we find something very suspicious. She was from Maine, and her town in 1689, Casco Bay, was raided, and her parents were killed. I think that she blamed John Alden for that, as he is a captain and was the authority in the area. But I don't think it was John Alden's fault. I think he did everything he could to protect the area. How do I know this? In the Candlemas Massacre, his own son was captured and taken to Quebec. Think about it this way. If he is uncaring, would he allow his own son to be captured? Because he was accused. He wasn't able to save his son, and his son was taken to the Bastille in France, the same prison where the French Revolution happened 100 years later. This was a prison with horrid conditions, but his son managed to survive, and 10 years later was released. John Alden, on the other hand, escaped jail in Boston and went into hiding for a year until he was cleared of charges after the trials. But in Little Hope, this massacre is an important clue because it shows part of Reverend Carver's motives. If we look closely at the plaque very carefully, we can see one of the victims who was taken into slavery was Madeline Carver, Reverend Carver's wife. This is why I think Reverend Carver wants custody of Mary. He wants custody of Mary because he has an obsession with her after his wife was taken. I think he is molesting her. This is what I think he means when he says our secret. In the 1970s flashback, we know that Megan was a student of Pastor Carson, who Anthony hallucinated as Reverend Carver. Pastor Carson was arrested years later for some kind of satanic cult that he was running. We can even find his shed in Little Hope. We know he was doing something bad, which explains Megan's strange behavior. Reverend Carver makes it seem like he's leading a quest of justice against Satan, but in reality, he is manipulating Mary to accuse her family members and anyone who questions him so that he can have custody of her. He takes a sick pleasure in having the victims killed, and if you find his Bible, it's the ultimate proof of his deception. He is some kind of Satanist or occult obsessor. But now here's the question. We know that Reverend Carver is evil and manipulating Mary for power, but what about his real-life counterpart, the person that he was based on, Reverend Samuel Parris? Was he as evil and bad as Carver? Oh yes, he was. So what was Parris's background exactly? Who was he before he became a pastor? He was originally from London, England, and was the son of a merchant. His father owned a sugar plantation in Barbados, which he inherited when his father died in 1673. Parris was 20 years old at the time. He ran the plantation in Barbados for 7 years. He had 2 slaves who worked on his plantation, named Tabitha, and this is the same Tabitha he brought to Salem, and her husband, John Indian. That's right, before this guy was a reverend, he owned a plantation that had slaves. In 1680, a hurricane destroyed most of his plantation, and he sold his land and moved to Boston. He brought Tabitha and John Indian with him. He met his first wife, Elizabeth Eldridge, and bought a warehouse, and tried to be a merchant. He failed at it, and so he was looking for other ways to make money, and he was looking into becoming a pastor in 1686. Eventually, he found the town of Salem, which he chose. The town of Salem was riddled with conflict, and several pastors had left. I think he tried to exploit this because he knew that he could easily be hired because no one wanted to be a pastor there. He would then tell the town that he is the pastor that they need. It's important to note he became a pastor for money and power. He did not become a pastor to serve God. I have never heard of something like this before. Today, almost everyone who becomes a priest does so because they want to serve God and they're religious. But Parris was different. And he still owned Tibita and John Indian as slaves when he became a pastor. A pastor is meant to be a man of God, but instead this man is a greedy, disgusting human being who owns other people as property. The town chose him to become minister, and he was given a home, a barn, 2 acres of land, and a salary of 66 pounds a year, which in this time period would be around $20,000 a year. Why does a priest have all of this? Why does a priest have 2 acres of land, a barn, and why do they own 2 slaves? The 66 pounds he made a year was enough for him and his family to live off. In this time period, even though it's equal to roughly $20,000 a year, people made much less than this, especially in the town. And they didn't have all the expenses that we have today. So with that $20,000 a year, the 66 pounds, that was plenty of money for him to live off. But it doesn't end there. Parris would constantly demand a higher salary. He wanted more money. And not only that, he was so greedy that he refused to pay for his own firewood. He demanded that the citizens of Salem pay for his firewood. In the book The Crucible, which was a story about the witch trials, Parris tells the people that they got a good deal with him because a well-educated man like him, 66 pounds a year for his salary, is apparently a good deal. That shows how greedy he is. In The Crucible, a lot of the characters are different ages than what they were really, but this is one thing the story got right about the witch trials. How greedy do you have to be that you demand others to pay for your firewood? But get this. 1 year before the witch trials started, in 1691, the town appointed a new committee of 5, which generally were town citizens that were elected. This new committee had a problem with Parris, and they wanted to abolish his salary. The committee wanted to lower taxes, which would be used to pay for his salary, and they didn't believe that he deserved those 2 acres of land. They didn't believe that he deserved all the stuff that he had gotten. They wanted to replace his salary with voluntary contributions, which is what priests relied on for hundreds of years instead of a salary. That's how priests got by. Parris protested over it, and he led masses and sermons against the town's local government. He claimed that it was a battle between him and Satan. So if you didn't want to pay for Reverend Parris's firewood or pay higher taxes for his salary, you were called a Satanist. And further researching this, his salary was actually abolished for some time. This new committee was appointed in October 1691. The witch hysteria began in February of 1692, not even half a year into the new committee's rule. Is it a coincidence that the witch hysteria began right after this, right after Parris's salary had been abolished? I don't think so. I think that Parris used the town's doctor to declare his kids, Betty and Abigail, possessed. Then what I think he did is he used the witch trials to solidify his power. Think about it. The trials went really well for him. He gained a lot of power from it. He was then able to keep his salary and increase his position. He could now use this as so-called proof that it was a battle between him and Satan. I think he intentionally manipulated the trials for this purpose, and I think he manipulated both Betty and Abigail into making accusations against others. Think about it. What are kids taught? Respect their parents and authority. And not only is Parris their guardian, but he is the town's pastor. Parents in this time period would teach their kids to respect and follow pastors. The kids didn't know what they were doing was wrong. Both Betty and Abigail were around 10 to 12 years old. These kids, while they were making accusations, they were just kids. They were victims. The real criminals here are people like Parris who manipulated them and told them they were possessed. If the pastor and their guardian told them they were possessed, they would believe it. So yes, I believe very strongly that Reverend Parris instigated and manipulated trials to his advantage. He would rile up the town, claiming that there was witches, wizards, and demons infiltrating it. He gave testimony against several of the accused, and I believe that many of the accused were people he did not like. We know that many of the accused were simply people that weren't also liked in Salem. But there's something else that shows just how evil this man is. Remember Tibita, who was one of the first who was accused? I think that she was accused so that Parris could throw blame off of himself for further accusations. The reason for this is that Tibita was Parris's slave. I think that he had her accused to claim that someone in his own household was a witch, so he could say that he's not abusing his power. But why did Tibita confess? Remember how I said I would cover this when I got to Parris? Why did she confess? Why did she admit to being a witch? 1 year after the trials ended, in 1693, Robert Califf was writing a book titled More Wonders of the Invisible World. This was a book where he was criticizing the Salem Witch Trials and the hysteria around it. He asked Tibita about why she confessed. She stated that before she was even questioned, she was beaten by Parris, so much that she couldn't take it. Parris beat a false confession out of her and coached her on what to say when she was questioned. I believe Tabitha 100%. Reverend Parris was not a good man. After her false confession, he left Tabitha in jail and refused to pay her jail fees. So Reverend Carver and Little Hope, is he an accurate portrayal of Parris? I think he is. Both Carver and Parris are around the same age. Both of them instigated the witch trials. Both of them manipulated little girls into making false confessions for their own benefit. When you see Reverend Carver and Little Hope, just know, this man was based on a real person. But now the question is, what happened to Parris? Did he get away with it? Well, to address Parris's fate, let's compare him to Reverend Carver. In the good ending of Little Hope, Abraham exposes Carver's corruption and manipulation. Mary is spared from execution, and Carver is arrested and taken away to be hanged. In real life, the Salem Witch Trials ended when Governor William Phips' own wife was accused of witchcraft. The governor's wife was accused. When he heard of this, he officially disbanded his own special court of Oyer and Terminer. Phips' excuse for the trials was that he was away in Maine, helping to build forts to defend from French raids. But this isn't a viable excuse. He set up these courts that allowed this madness. He had his lieutenant governor, William Stoughton, appointed as the high judge, and this man was a psycho, condemning several people to death in Boston. Stoughton had 8 people currently awaiting trial, and he ordered 8 graves to be dug before the trial even commenced. This shows that Stoughton had no intention of giving these people a fair trial. They were going to be executed regardless. Phips had pardoned all 8, and Stoughton stormed out of the court in protest. Governor Phips then banned all spectral evidence, officially ending the trials. A more merciful court was set up, and the death penalty wasn't sought anymore for any kind of witchcraft accusations. Phips died from illness in London in 1694, awaiting corruption charges. Stoughton then became governor, and even though he was governor, no more witch trials began as the public had largely turned against it. It's good that these trials were ended, however, look at the circumstances of it. People were constantly being accused of ridiculous charges with no proof and executed. And how did it end? When the governor's own wife was accused of it. They accused the wrong person, and it shows the hypocrisy of people like Governor Phips. So many innocent people died, and he was fine with this going on, but when his own wife was accused, it officially ended. It's good that his wife wasn't put on trial, but the point that I'm making is that these people were all fine with what was going on until one of their family members was accused. Over the next few years, the public largely turned against the trials, and I think the reason for this was that no one was going to be executed for it anymore, so people weren't scared to speak their minds. Now this goes back to Parris. He was charged for his role in the trials in 1693 in a Parris trial for priests. His trial went up until 1694. The victims in the Salem Witch Trials were tried and executed in 2 weeks, but Parris's trial went on for many months. He apologized for his role in the trials in an essay, but this wasn't a real apology. He wasn't really sorry, he was just trying to save himself. So what happened? Unfortunately, he was cleared of all charges. He was never punished for his role. But I know a lot of you guys are watching and thinking, what? How? How can he be cleared of all charges after everything he did? It's because Parris was one of the elites. Think about it. If he was condemned and hanged, all the other elites, the judges, the prosecutors, and the church officials who led these trials would also be executed. So they were saving themselves by declaring him not guilty. How disgusting is this? The same people who ran the trials get to judge now who is guilty for the false witch hunt? Parris's right to be a pastor wasn't even revoked. Parris had seized several people's land during the trials in an effort to pay himself, and despite his so-called apology, he refused to return the land, proving he wasn't sorry. The people took him to civil court in Ipswich, another town in which they won. Parris was forced to return the land, but the court also ordered his salary to be paid. Parris then left Salem in 1696 and became a preacher in the town of Stowe, later a preacher in Concord and Dunstable until 1711. He died in 1720, either 66 or 67 years old. He was most likely chased out of each town, and for good reason. But what happened to Abigail, the little girl who Mary is based on in Little Hope, the girl who was Parris's niece, who made the first accusations? This is really creepy, but it's unknown. That's right, the girl who made the first accusations mysteriously disappeared right after the trials. And the strange thing is that her relation to Reverend Parris has never been proven. She is called his niece, but there's no proof on her origins or that she is related to Parris in any way. Where she comes from is a mystery. However, the fact that she just disappears from history right after the trials is very suspicious. You would think that there would be some kind of record, something that said something about her later life, but there's nothing. Her mystery is shrouded in conspiracies. What do I think happened? Based on everything that I have read, I think that Parris killed her and hid her body. Why? Because she could expose Parris for his lies and manipulation. Think about it, she was around 12 at the start of the trials. After a few years, she would be a teen and realize she was used by him, and what he made her do was wrong. She could testify against him and have him hanged. If she claimed that he made her lie, I think that would be the end of Parris. But why wasn't Parris prosecuted after Tabitha said he beat her to confess and coached her on what to say? It's because of racism. In this time period, slavery was legal even in the northern colonies, and slaves had very little say in society. It would be the word of a slave against a pastor. No court will listen to it, but Tabitha was telling the truth. This man was evil. Think about it. Tabitha does not pose a threat to him alone, but together with Abigail and Tabitha both testifying against him, I don't think he will be cleared that time. So I think he killed Abigail and hid her body somewhere in the woods where it would never be found again. The evil of this man makes me so angry. A slave owner who became a pastor, not to serve God, but for money and power. A greedy man who demanded higher taxes for his salary. A man who seizes land from others. A man who manipulates kids into making false accusations. A man who beats women into making false confessions. A man who manipulates an entire town into condemning and murdering innocent people that he doesn't like for his own ego and power. Excuse my language, but this man, Reverend Parris, was an evil bastard. It pisses me off that he got away with it. It's no wonder Reverend Carver was based on him. He's just like him. And that is how the witch trials ended. Almost no one in the courts or church was prosecuted for their roles in the trial. But there is something else I wanted to discuss, which was the ending to Little Hope. I consider the good ending to be personally canon, where all the characters survive and Reverend Carver is arrested at the end of the game. The character that can end the madness is Abraham, who Anthony imagines as himself in that period. Remember that Reverend Carver is trying to gain custody of Mary. He has Mary accuse her sister, who was burned at the stake. This was a form of execution that was done to accused witches, but for also a variety of other crimes. The execution is the most infamous during the Spanish Inquisition, where in its 350-year period, between 30 to 50,000 people were burned at the stake. This is one of Tabitha's executions, and it's based on how Tanya dies at the beginning of the game. If she burns to death, then her witch trial double will be burned, but if she tries to climb down the balcony and gets hung on her scarf, she will be hung from a tree. A lot of the people think that during the Salem Witch Trials, people were burned, but this didn't really happen in the colonies. I was not able to find a record of someone being burned at the witch trials in North America. This was something that happened in Europe. Now, hanging Tabitha, that's her other execution, this is how the majority of victims died during the witch trials. The vast majority were hanged from a tree. 25 people died during the Salem Witch Trials, 19 were hung, and 5 died in jail, and one, Giles Corey, was crushed to death. Mary's brother David is thrown from a church tower and impaled on a fence. Now, did this happen during the trials? No, this was put in along with the burning to make the story even darker. However, the scary thing is this is actually a form of execution in many countries even today. Yes, today, in 2021, people are still thrown from rooftops in a few countries. There are countries in Asia today where gay people are heavily discriminated, and a lot of countries where gay people are thrown in prison and executed, and one of the executions is throwing people from rooftops. ISIS, the terrorist organization, also does this, but there are governments in that region that do it, actual governments. Groups of people are heavily persecuted and killed, people that they don't like. It's horrible, and it needs to end. And the United Nations, they have done very little to stop it. It has been 320 years since the end of the Salem Witch Trials, and there are still many countries that execute people based on religious law by throwing them off rooftops. It's just horrible and crazy to think that stuff like this can still go on. It really needs to end. But moving on to the good ending, Abraham can stop the trials, and does this when he asks Anthony what he is supposed to do. Mary has realized at this point that she was used by Carver, and he was deceiving her. Carver then tries to throw the blame onto her. I think that this scene in it has a lot of symbolism to it. First, let's talk about Abraham. His name is Abraham because Anthony imagines him as himself back then, but there's something else. In the Bible, Abraham, to show his love for God, was going to sacrifice his son. God sent an angel down to stop him and tell him not to do that. Maybe that represents this scene. You may represent the angel telling Abraham not to let Carver sacrifice Mary to the courts. And if Abraham is told to stop Carver, he whispers something in the judge's ear. And this is most likely what Mary told Abraham Carver had done to her, and the judge then says that he's sick to his stomach on what he heard. When Carver is confronted, I think that this is the best scene in the game, which plays here.
Here in one place again. I am filled with dread at the purpose.
I assure all gathered here today that our town will be free of the devil's grasp. Together, by God's grace, little hope will prevail. My word on it.
This court is hastily convened, but with good reason. If we are to finally rid ourselves of the evil which has infested Little Hope, then we must act today. I accuse you, Mary, of witchcraft. What say you, Reverend?
The evidence, as discovered through my investigation, is beyond question. Mary uses her puppet as a familiar to summon and serve the devil.
We have been deceived by a child, by her guise of innocence. This puppet was mistakenly used to denounce Tabitha, but it has always belonged to Mary and Mary alone. She allowed her own kin to be executed as she watched in silence.
That is not so! Liar!
Now this tainted child, this creature of Satan has the marrow to accuse me, a man of God, of wrongdoing.
This is crazy. These people have lost their freaking minds.
It was never my intention to bring harm to this town, or its people. Can you not help me?
What can I do? If I could do something to stop this, I would, but now in her hour of greatest need, this child of the damned pleads once more for the devil's help.
I beg the court's indulgence. Please guide me at this time. I seek your counsel.
We have to stop this. The only madness is right here in this court. Carver, he's the evil one.
We have been swayed by malice. The truth hidden from us, but not by Mary. Reverend Carver is the one urging us to believe in the devil.
Be silent.
This is all
You'll
his
not deceive
doing.
us any longer. Your true purpose is plain to see. I will see this town purged of all evil.
He's right. Listen to him. Carver is the guilty one.
What must I do to bring Little Hope back into the light? I fear the Reverend and what he is capable of.
You have to stop Carver. It's him, don't you get it? He's condemning Mary to take the heat off himself.
I know what must be done here.
Be still. What is the meaning of this outrage?
What I have just learned sickens me to my core. There are serious questions which must be asked of you. How can a man of God conduct himself in such a way? Mary, your suffering is at an end. You are free to leave.
Fools! Misled by a child! Do you not see what she is? The truth stares at you from the depths of hell, yet you see nothing. The devil's daughter has deceived you all. Not me. I see her. I see her! Satan's whore! You will pay heavily for your crimes. I was one of the first to fall under your spell. Now all of Little Hope is mesmerized by you.
I have not the words. Without you, I would be dead. You saved me. I shall remember you all my days.
But I didn't save you.
So what would have happened to Carver at this point? He would have been subject to the same trial system that he subjected so many other people to. He would have been taken away to be hanged. This scene represents the justice that the victims of the witch trials had never gotten. This is how the witch trials should have ended. The madness of Parris should have been stopped, and he should have faced punishment. But instead, this man, just like Carver, murdered so many innocent people for his own ego. And that's why I love this ending so much, because in this ending, you are convincing the people. You're not just the one that's stopping Carver. You convince Abraham and the others to actually stand up to Carver, and the people in Little Hope actually realize that he is the source of evil. He's the source of all the problems. Many people were upset by the ending to Little Hope when you find out at the end of the game that Anthony imagines the whole thing, including the modern-day characters. But I love this ending. Why? Because it represents the witch trials perfectly. Think about it this way. What is the story of Little Hope? We follow the story of Anthony, a man who was falsely accused of murdering his family. He tried to make tea and used matches. He was then locked out of the house and watched his family die. He had matches in his hand. This is what the witness saw when he approached Anthony. This witness then falsely accused him of murdering his family. And is there anything strange about the witness? He has the exact same face as the judge in the witch trials. The reason for that is because the judge represents the unreasonableness of the courts. Courts that were made to do nothing but condemn, not carry out justice. So you see, the witness in that case just saw Anthony with the matches and figured that Anthony must have have murdered his family when that wasn't what happened. All the characters executed represent the victims of the trials. We see how these people did nothing wrong, but they were condemned to death. Mary represents Abigail, or the girls that were manipulated into condemning others, and Carver, he represents the madness and evil of the trials. He represents Reverend Parris, everything that was wrong during that time. And this is why I like this ending, because it represents it perfectly. What happened to Anthony was a modern-day witch hunt. He was accused and vilified for murdering his family. Protesters had threatened him, and his life was never the same again. The fact that all the monsters were not real pays the best tribute to the victims of the witch trials, because if these monsters were real, you would then think to yourself, maybe there was something evil back then, but there was no supernatural evil. The only evil was the courts and Reverend Parris. Anthony imagines the modern-day characters as his family. In the flashback to his youth, all of the family members are arguing and do not get along, and they die without ever making peace with each other. Each of the characters in modern day have a monster that tries to specifically kill only them, and that monster is based on how the characters died. Taylor's monster is either a hanging monster or a burned monster, depending on how Tanya died. John's monster is a crushed monster, based on how James died. Daniel's monster, an impaled spike one, is based on how Dennis died. And lastly, Angela's monster, a chained water one, is based on how Anne died. All of these deaths happened again, but recreated in the witch trials. The monsters specifically target their doubles because they may represent their sins. The reason Anthony has no monster is because he did not die, and because he did nothing wrong. He never had a conflict with anyone. When he sees Megan in modern day, he is unable to decide on whether she means him harm or not. The reason for this is because he's struggling to decide on whether she was at fault for the fire. That's why in his mind, when he recreates the witch trials, he can't decide on whether Mary is innocent or not. But at the end of the game, you begin to realize that it was the Reverend that was manipulating the whole thing. And in Little Hope, you find out that Megan was actually abused by the priest, and she was tormented, she was traumatized, and this may have sparked the fire. So is Megan truly at fault for what had happened? She was being abused and targeted, but she might not have even started the fire, and we'll talk about that a little later. At the start of the game, all the characters are arguing, and they're not on good terms with each other, even Daniel and Taylor, despite them being a couple. However, if you pursue the good ending, they're all friendly with each other at the end of the game, and they're working together. The only way the monsters can be destroyed is by each character confronting them and being heroic and selfless. Taylor's monster can be defeated by being heroic and telling Daniel to run away, concerned for his safety over herself. Daniel's monster can be destroyed when he chooses not to run away and tells the others to go, and instead directly confronts it in the factory basement. Angela's monster can be defeated when she decides to stay with John and help him instead of running away. And lastly, John's monster is destroyed when he holds the door and tells everyone to run away. This represents all of the characters destroying their past sins and misdeeds. That's why the monsters disappear, and this is why I love this ending, because Anthony can finally make peace with the fact that his family is dead. Additionally, when he meets Vincent at the end of the game, the sister's former boyfriend, the family at the start of the game does not like him, and Anthony is the only one who defends him. Vincent blamed Anthony for Tanya's death. He was the one who constantly put flowers on her grave for decades, and he had even written for Anthony to burn in hell on a note in the trunk of his car. If you are nice to him throughout the game, he comes to the realization that Anthony was actually innocent, and that he's suffering from a psychological breakdown. Being in the town once again is destroying him. That is why he tells him to leave and not look back, and that he understands he wasn't at fault, accepting his family was finally dead, and making peace with Vincent. Forgiving Anthony. This is what finally allows him to move on. Anthony's tragic backstory represents a modern-day witch hunt, and this is why I think the ending was perfect. And as for Megan, she may be innocent. She may not have killed anyone. I came across this video a few months ago from this YouTube channel called The Hidden Object Guru, which I will link his channel down below. He's a great channel that explains a lot of Little Hope lore, and he also does a lot of horror games. Make sure you guys check him out and subscribe to him. But anyways, Hidden Object Guru, he argues that Megan may not have actually killed her family. We have to remember that this is Anthony's version of the events, and if you watch the scene before the fire very carefully, you never see Megan do any of the bad things. The door at the start is shown to get stuck in freezing temperatures, and just like Hidden Object Guru mentioned, this may have happened to the upstairs balcony door. We never see Megan actually close the door after Tanya walks out. It may have been the wind. We see Megan sitting down in the exact same position as before, like she didn't move. The locks upstairs may be prone to jamming in the cold like the front doors. Anthony goes outside to see what is going on, and the door is locked. Again, we do not see Megan do this. Neither do we see her knock the stepladder down or lock Anne in the bathroom. We do not even see her knock the doll over. It's as if it all falls on its own. She may have tried to open a door for Anthony and place the doll down without realizing where it was, and it started to fire. We can see Megan run and scream when her father died, showing she had no intention of doing that. She's just a child, like in the witch trials, who does not understand the gravity of the situation until it's too late. The key that we see in Megan's hand is the final clue in the game found at the burnt house. This key is by itself, which, why would she just put it back in the clock after locking all the doors? Hidden Object Guru's video explains this really well, but the other possibility is that she intentionally killed her family. If she did that, then I think she spared Anthony. If you think about it, Anthony is the only character that is actually nice to her. Every single other family member is hostile and nasty to her. Anthony is the only one who is nice to her and realizes something is wrong. All of his choices are friendly dialogue regarding Megan. However, if you play as Tanya, all of her choices are nasty to Megan. Thus, when Anthony stepped out, she may have locked him out to prevent him from dying because he was the only one that Megan liked. However, what is great about this is we won't know what is the real truth because of the fact that we never see Megan start to fire. We won't know whether it was intentional or an accident. Let me know in the comments down below what you think might have caused the fire. But there's one final thing that I want to cover in this lore video, and that is, what caused the kids to start acting so weird? I am talking about Abigail and Betty, the 12-year-old girl and the 10-year-old girl. What caused them to start acting so strange that the doctor diagnosed them as being possessed? Was it Parris' manipulation? I think part of it was that, but the initial strange behaviors, what caused them? Well, in Little Hope, we know that Carver was coaching Mary on how to act and accuse others. In the 1970s flashback, we know that Megan's strange behavior was because of Reverend Carson's abuse. He was abusing her and trying to bring her into his cult. That is why we can find a paper with a black clawed demon in it. It's a children's drawing, most likely made by Megan. And in the church, we can actually find a picture of Reverend Carson, and he's wearing black. That black monster that she's drawing, that represents Reverend Carson in the 1970s. There is even a drawing on the wall at home, and we can see the shadow of this monster before the fire starts with his claws. The monster is not real, but in Megan's mind, it's the bad manifestation of Carver's abuse and manipulation. But in real life, I think there might have been something more. No one is alive from this time period, so we can't interview them. But I think I have the answer. I think I know what caused the girls to act so strange over 300 years ago. The answer, it's in plain sight. And what is the answer? 2 words. They're kids. That's the answer. What does this mean? Think about it. How often do you see kids running around, screaming, throwing stuff, breaking things, and lying not to get into trouble? This is all common behavior for kids, even back then. This is what I think happened. I think that the kids were playing around, messing around, screaming and running, and the pastor, because of how manipulative he is, he called in the town doctor and convinced him that his kids were possessed. Then when the kids were told they were possessed because this was their guardian, and pastor telling them this, they believed it. But what about the pains that the kids said they felt? How they said they felt something stabbing them? That's also explainable. Think about it. How oftentimes are you concerned you may be sick with something, and when you hear the symptoms of that, you begin to imagine you have the symptoms when you don't. For example, I thought that I had something wrong with my stomach many years ago. I thought that I was feeling pain, and when I went to a doctor, he told me that I was perfectly healthy. And then when I took the doctor's advice, when he told me that I was healthy, it went away. It's because I was imagining it. I thought that I was sick when I wasn't, and this is what happened with these girls. Do you feel sharp pain? That means Satan is stabbing you. Oh wait, yes I do. And they began to imagine that when they weren't. So yes, I believe that all of this began simply because the kids were just being kids. And the Reverend took this and used it to prove so-called witches. In Little Hope, we can actually find a book on parenting at the end of the game that survived a fire. This shows that the parents did not know what they were really doing. They either had no experience, or they were neglecting them, or maybe both. We know the kids are adopted, so they were most likely adopted when they were already in late stages of their childhood. The parents in Little Hope did not realize something was wrong with Megan. Just like back then, they did not understand simply child behavior. It's hard to believe that all of this started because of a bunch of kids playing around, but I believe that's what happened. And bad and evil men like Parris used this to push an agenda that increased their power, accusing and murdering anyone they wanted. And that is that for this lore video, and I Hope you guys enjoyed this. This video took me almost 6 months to make. I know I had delayed this video several times, but this is why it took me so long, because of my script and research. But overall, I had a lot of fun making this video. This is one of my favorite lore videos that I ever made. Probably my ultimate favorite lore video. I love that Little Hope has taught more people about the trials and encouraged them to look things up. I hope you might have learned something today that maybe you didn't know. But if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like, and thank you everyone for watching. I will also link my Men of Medan video at the end of this. That's another Dark Picture game in which I talk about the real story of the Orang Medan. I'll link my Little Hope playthrough also. And one thing I'll end this off with, I am really happy that I never grew up in that time period. After you see this game, and you watched this video, and you heard about the horrible things that went on during those trials, aren't you happy that you didn't grow up in that time period? Because I am so happy that I didn't grow up during that time period. What a horrible time period to live in during those trials, where people are just accusing each other left and right. So many innocent people had been murdered, and all because of a selfish and egoistical evil man. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this lore video, and if you guys have any questions about the trials, anything that I might not have covered that you want to know, post them down below. I'll try to reply to as many comments as I can. And once again, thank you everybody for watching. I will see you guys on the next one. Take care, everyone.